Let's see what Michael Savage wrote back in 2013, published in 2014, and see if there's any veracity to it. Ooh, big word, veracity. I'll bet the press secretary to Biden doesn't even know what the word veracity means. She never stepped on it. The NSA and American insecurity. Oh, it's boring. I don't want to read it. In Syria, let's move on. Not interested. Ukraine. Page 242. Let me make sense of what happened in Ukraine for you, Savage wrote. The legitimately elected Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, was ousted and the country placed in the hands of rebel forces spearheaded by Chechen Islamist radicals. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, along with Obama advisor Susan Rice, are neoconservatives. The neocons don't care which side you're on as long as they can work with you to create a political situation that they can grow into a war from which they will profit. Ooh, who wrote that? The so-called Ukrainian revolution was fostered and encouraged by Nuland, Rice, and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat. Over the weeks leading to the February 2014 uprising, these three were instrumental in staging a destabilization campaign. Working with Ukrainian rebels, they fostered the Ukrainian uprising that caused Yanukovych to flee from Kiev, is written here. In fact, it was Nuland herself who selected the new Ukrainian prime minister. She had this lined up 3 weeks before the insurrection in Ukraine started. Nuland's famous statement, F the EU, was leaked early in February, and it was a covert admission made public that we're on the side of the insurgents. That recording revealed that the administration favored installing Vitaly Klitschko as their choice to be deputy PM of Ukraine, with Arseny Yatsenyuk, Yats, as they referred to him, being their choice as prime minister. Now, here it comes now, for those of you who can follow the bouncing ball. Arizona Senator John McCain. Oh, ring the bell. I don't have one. Gong, gong, gong. John McCain was also part of this duplicity. McCain went to Kiev in December of 2013 and helped incite the mobs who would ultimately overthrow the legitimately elected president. If there was such a thing as a Nobel Anti-Peace Prize, I wrote, McCain would win it hands down for his work in Egypt and Syria, topped off by what he's done in Ukraine. McCain was proposing nothing less than we stage a military intervention in Ukraine, as he's done many times before. McCain was in Syria, secretly backing rebels there, rebels who turned out to be Islamist radicals, supposedly our sworn enemies. Ooh, McCain the war hero. McCain also made a covert trip to Libya, where he received an award from the military. This happened on the very day Sharia law was declared in that country, the same day McCain arrived. Oh, he really is the Manchurian candidate. While he was in Ukraine, McCain met with a number of rebels who were intent on regime change in that country, and he expressed regret that he wasn't having success, saying, I do not see a military option, and it's tragic. That's John McCain, war hero. The U.S.-supported insurgents took over Kiev and held the Ukrainian people hostage as the United States stood down and Putin amassed forces on the Russia-Ukraine border. As this was happening, Barack Obama mouthed the emptiest of words. There would be, quote, costs to Russia for military action against the insurgents, while the United States found that its hands were tied. In the early days of the rebellion, former Ukrainian President Yanukovych met with the rebels staging the uprising, and the two parties agreed to stop the violence and make an orderly transition to a new government chosen in a new set of elections. Instead, the right-wing rebels ignored the agreement and took over Kiev by force. Those would be the Nazis that Putin is talking about, the right-wing rebels, the Nazis who wear the same badge that the SS wore. You may not know that. The Azov Brigade, they wear the same insignia as the SS of Hitler. They took over Kiev by force with their armed patrols maintaining control through violence. The situation in Ukraine, remember I wrote this in 2013, published in 2014. The situation in Ukraine, I wrote this 10 years ago, don't tell anybody. The situation in Ukraine has been painted as a conflict between Vladimir Putin's Russia, the so-called bad guys, and Ukrainian rebels, the so-called good guys, who seek to oust Russia from a position of influence in Ukraine, install a new government that will be responsive to the Ukrainian people. Don't believe a word of it. It was written in 2013, published in 2014. The Ukrainian nationalists are fascists. Washington's original purpose for staging a coup in Ukraine was to move Ukraine away from Russia and bring Ukraine into the EU. In other words, the neocons and the bought and paid for moderates in the Obama administration wanted to wrest control of Ukraine from Putin's hands and gain economic and energy control over the country. As one commentator has pointed out, Western nations, with the United States leading the way, have been provoking Putin for decades. We've expanded NATO to include former Soviet states. Ukraine looks like the next target, and we've attacked allies of Russia, including Libya and Iraq. The United States, along with other Western nations, through our incursions into the politics, economics, and national security of Russia and several of its allies, has effectively caused the situation that resulted in Putin standing ready to invade Ukraine militarily if necessary. Written in 2013, published in 2014, happened in 2022. Putin is certainly not a good guy, Savage wrote, but he is not the villain in this. The Jews have always been the canaries in the coal mine of human rights in Russia, and Putin has been better to Russian Jews than any other Russian leader in the past century. With the elected government now driven out of Ukraine, the anti-Semitic US-backed fascist thugs who have assumed control are vandalizing synagogues and threatening the lives of Jews in Ukraine. Now I'm going to pause right there. They're so clever that they installed a Jewish head of state in Ukraine called Zelensky, the guy in the undershirt. Did you know that? He's the front man for the fascists? You didn't know that. I'm sorry. You didn't read that in the New York Times. Well, I can go on, and I'll continue here. Obama's attempts at thwarting Putin have essentially forced him to deploy military assets to Crimea and to annex that country. Crimea is an important region that Russia ceded to Ukraine in the 1950s when the USSR was reaching the height of its power and Ukraine was one of its puppet states. Let me give you some background that will help you understand what went on in Russia, Ukraine, and Crimea after the fall of the Soviet Union. I can't read any more of this because if I do, you'll come to understand I'm an enemy of the state because I know too much. And I don't want to be an enemy of the state, you see. We've come to understand that those in charge right now consider anyone who disagrees with their worldview as an enemy of the state. So you may not know what's going on in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but I wrote this in 2013, published in 2014. And I'll conclude the chapter in this little YouTube broadcast today by reading the end of this chapter. A small group of insiders in the U.S. government who have strong allegiances to a powerful group that favors war are running our foreign policy. And it's our allies who are most likely to be damaged by it. No, they've all joined the parade. I was wrong about that. Our allies were not damaged by it. They joined the fascist parade. Where U.S. interests are open to being undermined, George Soros is never far from the action. Soros funds the Open Society Foundations, which provides grants to agencies in EU countries that are actively working to undermine Russia. In a piece he wrote recommending that the EU intervene economically to help keep Ukraine financially viable, Soros had this to say, and I'll quote him now. The EU, along with the International Monetary Fund, is putting together a multi-billion-dollar rescue package to save the country from financial collapse. But that will not be sufficient to sustain the national unity that Ukraine will need in the coming years. Ukraine will need outside assistance that only the EU can provide, management expertise, and access to markets. That was Soros then. And we see what's happened since. We're seeing American foreign policy at its nadir, I wrote. The savage truth stopping the coming civil war. And then I went on to the world liberal revolution in the back of the end of this book. Make no mistake about it, the world liberal revolution. It's come almost to its conclusion now. And I said this book is not just about the coming civil war in America, it's also about the conflict that the current administration is pushing in the name of a broader worldwide liberal revolution. As I see it, the forces of the left are attempting nothing less than a socialist takeover of the world economy and global politics. The world liberal revolution is what the tens of millions of conservative, law-abiding Americans are fighting against, often without even knowing it. We are the equivalent of the anti-communists who fought Stalin.